I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and this is not my regular voice. I just want to be clear about that. I'm delighted. We're finally taping in Brooklyn. So excited about this. And more importantly, I got to see Sarah Kay record her audiobook for A Little Daylight Left back in January. And I almost fell off my stool. She was so good. And you know, when you're taping a podcast, you kind of have to glue yourself to your seat because there's all sorts of, stuff that you have to pay attention to. But Sarah was doing this thing where she's just walking in front of the stage and her entire body is in this entire piece. And I'm sitting here going, how have I not known who this person is? Why am I so behind the times? And Kaveh Akabar, Hanif Abdur-Rakib, right, Clint Smith, Franny Choy, there are some really interesting poets doing some really interesting stuff. And they all share a circle with Sarah, so I am late to the party. I will also say that I was late to the party, though, on Sophia Sinclair's poems and Aria Aber's poems, too, so I'm just sometimes late. I'm really sorry. But Sarah, thank you for making the time. I'm so excited you're here.
I'm thrilled to be here. And also, there's no late. It's just when you arrive is the right time for you. So thank you for arriving.
I need to know, though, and thank you for that, because, sometimes, especially as a bookseller, you're like, I'm supposed to know all of the things at all of the times. I'm curious, though, you have been a working poet since you graduated from college, and you do have a master's in education, which I love. But you sort of walked out of college and said, hey, I think I want to try this thing. It may or may not work. And it has worked. You are a working poet in a moment. Well, let's face it, the world's a little weird right now. That's the most polite way I can say it. But for you to be a working artist is very, very cool and very impressive. And how did we get here? Because part of it is ambition and part of it is rolling up your sleeves, but part of it is also just believing in the work, right?
Well, I was lucky enough to grow up in New York City. Ever heard of it? And when I was a kid, I loved poems, but I understood poems as being, I understood poetry as being a pretty solitary art form.
Right.
It was what I did in my journal for myself. I liked playing with words. I liked writing little stories, and that was the extent of my relationship to poems. Or I guess that's not the extent. The extent includes my parents, who are not writers nor poets, but they did do this very sweet thing when I was a kid where they would pack me lunch every day of elementary school, and then they would take turns writing a poem and putting it in my lunchbox. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes that sounds like too neat of an origin story, but I promise you, they did not think this was going to happen. This was not the plan when they were doing that. Mm-hmm. But they did do that. And so they also inadvertently initiated my relationship to what a poem was. But specifically in that context, a poem was a surprise. It was as dependable as clockwork every day. It was a secret. It was a gift that someone who loves you makes for you. Like, that's what I thought a poem was, but it was for me, and it was a tiny personal solo moment. Mm-hmm. And then when I was like 13 or 14, I got a letter in the mail that said, congratulations, you have been registered to compete in the New York City Teen Poetry Slam. Mm-hmm. A slam is like a competition for poetry. And I had never heard of a poetry slam. I had never seen a poetry slam. I'm an elder millennial, so we didn't have YouTube back then. So I couldn't just look that up. But I loved poems, and I thought maybe there'll be other kids my age who love poems. I went to this event, and it was sort of like the before and after moment, which is to say it was the moment that I learned that poetry did not have to be solitary. Poetry could be also communal.
Right.
And having poetry transform into something that could be communal is what started me really falling in love with it. And even though I was a teenager, I quickly fell into a community of adult poets who would gather every week to share poetry with each other. And they really made room for me in the house of poetry. And that became a thing that felt like both a gift to me and then honestly like a responsibility to pay it forward. And so I really wanted a chance to continue making room for more people in poetry.
And that's part of what I love so much about your, we're going to call it an origin story, because I am treating this woman like a superhero, and y'all can come along for the ride. But the idea that we can hold the door open, right? Poetry to me, when I was growing up, was always this very sort of formal. I mean, I got handed Thanatopsis at age 15, and there is no faster way to kill anyone's interest in poetry than saying, is it Keats? Is it Yeats? I don't even remember. I just remember thinking, this is not for me. So to come up later and find even stuff like Anne Sexton or, Robert Lowell. I mean, I grew up in New England, so there were a lot of, shall we say, difficult people who found their voice in poetry. And it was like, hey, everyone's parents had this stuff, so you could just find it really easily. But the idea that slam poetry too, like there was a moment in New York in the 90s where it was the thing. And it was really exciting to see what was coming out of the community and sort of who might be getting different kinds of, record deals or book deals or just watching people come into a community in a different way. It was really exciting. And I love the idea that poetry can be accessible, that you don't have to stand at a podium, right? And have a formal education is nice. I'm not saying don't get a formal education. I'm just saying that having options is amazing. And when I go through, and I've read A Little Daylight Left a couple of times now, and I was telling you before we started taping, like I actually left a galley open to the raccoon poem for a colleague of mine who has a thing for raccoons. And it was just very fun. And like, how often do you find a poem anywhere that has anything to do with a raccoon, right? But also more importantly, there's this tiny half Asian girl who's out in the woods for the first time. And so really it's less about the raccoon than it is about this tiny New Yorker who's suddenly in the woods going, what just happened? And that's the piece that still pings, right? So here you are doing this thing, which I want to go back to your parents being photographers for a second, because I do think, and you reference it in a couple of different places, where their sort of search for their art and precision in their art and looking for light and all of that sort of folds into how you approach writing. But you've been really serious about this now for more than a decade.
Yes, well, I don't know if I would say really serious about.
Okay.
Really delighted by.
Okay.
Baffled by. Curious about. Enthusiastic about. My parents are both photographers, and they fell in love with each other through their love of photography. That's like how they met and what they bonded over. And neither one of them were themselves, quote unquote, professional artists who anybody was paying to make photography. And what that means is that it makes sense to them,
right,
that you would love to make an art. And also they were not, so like I know a lot of people who don't take art making seriously, but they do take art making seriously, but also not too seriously, meaning they weren't snobby, they weren't pressureful about like you're only a real artist if it's your career. You know, none of those things. To them, it made sense that if you love a thing, you make a thing, and you make it for you, and you make it because you love to make it. And so the fact that I gravitated towards poetry was surprising to them, and but exciting. And I think there's a kind of unspoken permission given in that, having parents like that who are like, yeah, you love a thing, do that thing and follow it if you'd like. And if someone wants to help you make that your job, cool. And if it doesn't work, then you'll do something else or you'll figure something else out. And so I think a big part of my ability to follow poetry and see where it leads me is because I have parents who did not balk at that.
Yeah. There's value in poetry, and you've said this in a couple of different interviews. One, I love the idea of you poeming your way through life. So yeah, I'm quoting her. But the idea that you're not teaching poetry so that we end up with an army of poets, but that we are teaching people to be able to sit with their insecurities and their emotions and their humanity. And that's the piece that I went to a liberal arts college, and yes, I had uncles who did the whole basket weaving. Yeah. And we've all been there at Sunday dinner, right? But I love the idea that this is a landscape to explore our humanity in a way that prose doesn't necessarily give us. And I mean, yeah, I threw out some names of some folks who are working in poetry and prose, and they're doing amazing things. But I think there's a lot to be said for sitting with poetry in a way because the emotions are so much bigger. And I don't know if that's your experience, because I don't think you're writing prose yet.
Well,
okay.
she's trying.
Okay.
But I think a lot about vessels and like the shapes of vessels.
Okay.
I like boxes. I like vases. I like bowls. I like vessels and different shaped vessels. And I think wisdom and beauty and truth and humanity can be carried and shared in differently shaped vessels. And certain people take certain vessels more seriously than others, or maybe are just more familiar with certain shaped vessels than they are others. And so to me, it's not hierarchical, but because poetry is what I love, and,
right.
and the vessel shape that I love, I know with certainty that you can carry wisdom and truth and beauty in a poem shaped vessel. And I think a lot fewer people know that you can do that.
Right.
And so to me, I'm always excited about, I mean, I talk about doors a lot, but I really am excited about figuring out the different doors into poetry that can be opened for people. So if they do love fiction and they are used to reading novels, the great news is that there's a lot of poets who have written some great novels that we can recommend them. And then once they are excited about those writers, then we say, well, if you liked Martyr, perhaps you should check out Kaveh's poetry, for example.
Just tiny idea.
Just as an example. Or if you're a nonfiction reader, there are some amazing poets who are
Smith
kicking ass in nonfiction. And so you could come in through that door. If you're the type of person who would pick up a book that has a beautiful cover, I have great news for you. And if you're a person who feels like I would never pick up a book of poems, but I might be willing to listen to an audiobook that sounds like a little bit like what I'm used to listening to a live, like comedy hour, for example, maybe try that door. And if you're like, I don't have time to listen to a whole poetry hour, but I would watch a 3-minute YouTube video of you on stage, I've got some of those. And if you're like, no, thank you, I don't want to watch a woman at a microphone, but I would watch a short animation, then I've made some poems that are animation and poetry together. And there was a series, if you're a person that's like, I would really like to read poems, but I'm nervous and I haven't done it before, and the way the words look on the page intimidates me, and I need someone to hold my hand and show me how to do that. There's a web series I helped do a couple of years ago where we asked people who are poets or who love poetry to read a poem they love, and the visual of the video is the text on the page, but the audio is a person reading to you and showing you how they would handle the way the words fall on the page. So I don't believe there's a wrong door to enter. I am excited about finding more and more doors for people to learn that poems are vessels that might be relevant to their lives, that there's room for them in the house of poetry. That's what I get excited about.
I'm good with all of those metaphors. I mean, I think anything, no, really, anything that brings a reader to a new voice or a new art form is interesting to me. And especially when you can sort of blow up this idea of something being very sort of formal and studied, and it must be, I needed a writer to explain to me why Shakespeare, I had a Shakespeare thing for a while where I was like, I just can't. And I still sort of feel that way, and that's on me. But I've finally gotten over my Middlemarch thing, and I have read Middlemarch. And the sonnets are beautiful, and I appreciate it. But having Shakespeare explained to me is something that you need to see performed. And then the light bulb goes off, and I'm like, oh, that makes so much more sense, because reading it feels like a giant slog. And I know I'm supposed to be connecting with the language. And then you see someone like Sarah perform, right? And she's up there, and you're watching sort of the way your body moves in space, but also it's clear that you've memorized everything. Like, this is not, I do not need a teleprompter at my foot. But I love the idea that the words have two sort of ways of existing, right? Like, there's what you see on the page, but then there's also how they hit the air. And it's completely, wildly different. It feels like there's a lot of intersectionality in your work, that you are thinking about the performance piece, that you are thinking about the teaching piece, that you are thinking about the actual written words piece, and that you are always doing multiple things with every poem. Am I right about that?
Yes.
Okay. It's always exciting when the poet doesn't actually roll their eyes and go, what? No. But I do want to talk about this, because the idea, again, that you're connecting, essentially, you don't know what happens when you send these poems out into the world.
Right.
And you've taught in Indonesia, you have worked with poetry groups in Nepal. I know I'm missing some things. I mean, you've worked with groups all over the country, but I love the idea of building community through poetry. And if you can't necessarily speak the same language, then you have to be able to perform.
Mm. Well, one of the reasons that I love live performance, I mean, there's a lot of reasons I love live performance, but a big part of why I love live performance of poetry is, right, if you hand me a book of German poems, I don't speak German, so I can't access that. But I have gone to a poetry open mic in Germany where every single poet other than me was performing in German. And I knew which poems were love poems, and I knew which poems were funny, and I knew which poems were political. And and I had an experience of live art and poetry and community and shared presence and time that I loved. And so I think that obviously I care deeply about language and the words and the order in which they come. And also I get excited about what performance, like the other toolbox that performance offers me. And, you mentioned, there's two elements. There's the words on the page, and then there's when you're performing. I actually think there's like even more than that. Okay. I'm always like really excited about when there's something about a piece of art that justifies its form. To me, there's like no more satisfying like brain scratch, you know? So like if you are reading a book and part of you goes, oh, this is such a good book, but I can tell it's going to be a better movie. They're going to make it into a movie. That feels disappointing, right? Because the form you're encountering isn't the form you feel like it should be. Whereas when you're reading a book and there's some part of you that's like, oh, this would only work as a book. They can't make this into a movie. That feels so good to be reading that book. And I don't necessarily have a desire for someone to go, this wouldn't work any other way.
Right.
But what I do love is when a person encountering something that I have made, when there is some part of them that goes like, ooh, I really had to experience it in this form. And therefore I'm thinking about like, what are the little gifts that I can put into the form that it's in? So when a poem is going to be on the page, I really am thinking about like a person who's looking at the page and what it looks like and how your eyes move and the pace that you are pulled through the poem and the order it comes after the poem before it and before the next poem. So I want the person who is holding the book to feel rewarded for having the book in their hands and go like, wow, I can't believe someone would listen to this and miss out on all of these little winks and ampersands and caesuras and gifts that she put in the poem for me to look at. But then I want, when someone is listening to the audiobook, to go, I can't believe you would read this on the page and miss out on the sound of the live room laughing. And when she is, clearly making a joke with her voice or the tone or what it feels like to be whispered to, and when I'm on stage for an audience, then I want people in the room to be like, oh man, I had to be in the room for that. I can't believe people try to watch videos, So I'm thinking about the form and I'm thinking about the person on the other end of the thing when I'm thinking about how to give it to them. It is the most unfathomable gift to me still that anyone wants to spend their time with words that I made. And so if they're going to spend time, I want that time to be worth their time.
So speaking of time, there's a poem in this new collection. There are two poems that I asked Sarah to read. One of them was not part of the audio recording, so when I read it in the galley, my jaw dropped. And it's also an excuse for me to bring in Franny Choy, who I think is pretty great. And Franny sort of inspired this particular piece, and it's also a way for me to transition to some of your audience questions too. So we're doing lots of things, but mostly we get to listen to Sarah read a very cool poem. So Ministry of Loneliness.
Sure.
Do we want to start with how Franny helped this poem come into the world?
Yeah. I mean, Franny Choy, for those who don't already know, is an amazing poet and professor and essayist and human who I love, who I've known since she was 17 and I was 18. And so we have also grown up together. And I think a lot of my poems or a lot of what I have always thought of the job of a poet to be has historically been about witness and observation and holding something to the light and saying, this is what it is, this is what I see, and sharing that back. And Franny is a person who also says the job of a poet can also be to say, this is what isn't yet and could be. And I think we are in a moment where active, intentional dreaming and imagining and planning for what isn't but could be is really vital work to be done.
Yep.
Because what is isn't working. And so seeing Franny model that, I think, is what opened the possibility of this kind of poem to me. I saw a Business Insider headline and read an article which said that in Japan, more people died by suicide in the month of October 2020 than had died from COVID-19 in all of 2020 up to that point. And in response, Japan instituted a new position of government, a minister of loneliness. The minister of loneliness has abolished email. He is installing tin cans on every windowsill with a piece of string to someone else's window. Not several, just one. Each person, of course, does not need a lot of people to speak to, just the one, but the one must be reliable, must be available when needed. We are employing a buddy system now. Every day is a field trip to the Adulthood Museum, and we don't go home until everyone has been accounted for. The way you find your buddy is a nationwide game of Guess Who, where you sing the song that is always stuck in your head. Describe the movie you can't get through without crying, the hardest you've ever laughed, the outfit you wish you could pull off, and the only person who can spot you is the one you are assigned. All of Japan is a ball of string now. The economy has ground to a halt. Productivity is entirely impossible. Sometimes you go to talk into the can on your windowsill, and a knot in the string accidentally gives you someone else's conversation, the fading fabric of someone else's loneliness evaporating into the air between buildings. You are allowed to eavesdrop, but so is everyone else. The Minister of Loneliness has moved all kindergartens to the ground floor of elderly assisted living centers. There are daily story hours, animal shelters across the street. The Minister of Loneliness has not abolished Valentine's Day, but has employed a nationwide bring enough for the class regulation, and nobody goes home empty-handed. The Minister of Loneliness has prescribed therapy for everyone. Daily walks through the many gardens, opportunities for meditation by a brook, in the rain, under falling blossoms, or along a snowy riverbank, depending on the season. He has commissioned musicians and actors and poets to create radio plays and poetry readings and concerts to be pumped across the knotted tin can radio lines every evening. When you order dinner for one, the person who delivers it arrives with an appropriate ability and comfort level dance instruction video and 2 hours to spare. Grieving is encouraged, and art making is rampant, but because of the knots, sometimes when you are expecting a visit from a grief counselor, the dance partner food delivery arrives instead. Sometimes they are the same person. The Minister of Loneliness isn't tired. He is the most popular man in the country. He has a crush on a middle school teacher across town, and everyone eavesdrops to hear the way he stumbles when she answers. Everyone is on the edge of their seats. Everyone forgets about dying because they can't wait to find out what happens next. Everyone has opinions. The minister has to start a hotline where people can call in to tell him their thoughts. The tin cans rattle nonstop. The minister is grateful for the advice, but is nervous. His crush will hear the commotion. He is nervous she prefers quiet, but he does not know for sure yet. He does not know what she is thinking, does not know how she spends her Saturdays, or how she prefers her tea, or whether she likes to walk in the rain, but he likes wondering when nobody is paying attention, when the windowsills are quiet, late at night awake. He does like to wonder.
Yeah, okay. I was watching you guys watch her. And that's really the fun part too, right? Like here we've got this terrible idea, right? She read you the introductions, a terrible idea. And then we get wit and we get charm and we get, yeah, it's bad. Stuff is bad. Stuff is really bad. But you know what? We get to make art out of it. And I love the idea of tin can, right? Like all of it. That poem just delights me to no end. And to know that it's out there in the world, right? And I can watch all of you guys respond to it just delights me to no end. But it does also bring up a question from the audience. Do you have any poems that you turn to in fraught times, and how have you found the poems that bring you the most comfort?
Oh, so many poems that I turn to in fraught times. That's my whole thing. There are poets whose work I already know and love, and I get excited whenever they have a new poem, like a record drop. And I also rely on poets and friends who love poetry to share new poems that they love. Again, it's such a funny thing to have to think of poem as a little vessel, but we have potlucks, bring me your poem that is helping you through the fraught times, and I will bring you mine and we will share them. I would say what's funny is I'm very vocal about sharing them. I think if anyone follows me on any internet platform, you already know the poems because I'm always yelling about them. There are poems I listen to multiple times a year as touchstones and lily pads that I land on when the waters are getting too high. Off the top of my head, Ross Gay, Catalog of Unabashed Gratitude. Also Laura Lamb Brown Lavoie, Titanic, which is also in the epigraph of this book. There's a Nicole Seeley poem called Object Permanence that you'll all have to read at my funeral. There's a Cameron Awkward Rich, speaking of Franny, Cameron's spouse Cam. Franny's spouse Cam has a poem called Meditations in an Emergency that I revisit. Someone just put their hand on their chest. Yeah, you know the ones. And it's because when we find a poem that is a touchstone, we don't hoard them.
Right.
We share them so that someone else can hold it like a talisman, There was a brief period of time where I got to do this column for the Paris Review online called Poetry RX. And I did it with Kaveh Akabar and Claire Schwartz. And it was sort of like a faux advice column where people could write in with their very specific heartache, and we would prescribe a poem for their troubles. And the more specific the problem, the more delightful the poem find. It felt so good for someone to be like, I applied for a job in tech that I know I won't get. Do you have a poem for this? And I'd be like, you bet I will. That feeling felt so good and continues to stay. For me, one of the biggest joys is finding a poem that offers me language for something I did not even know I needed language for. And because that is a moment in my own life that I love, also trying to be the person who does that in other people's life gives me a real buzz. And so I am always saying, what about this poem? What about this poem?
Do you have a favorite line of yours that you've written?
My own lines? No.
I didn't ask the question.
That is outrageous. No,
okay.
Honestly. I think usually, sometimes people say, what's your favorite poem of your own? And the true answer is, whatever the most recent poem is. I will write a poem and I'll be like, this is the best poem I've ever written. And then a couple days will go by and I'll be like, anyway, guess I got to write a new poem.
All right, I'm going to grab your vessel metaphor for a second, and I'm going to apply it to New York.
Ooh.
Because New York is its own vessel. We do leave. We understand that we do not live in Oz. I understand, or I should say, I know I don't live in Oz. But New York does shape your work. It has shaped you as a person.
Guilty.
So I am grabbing a couple of questions from the audience. How does New York shape your writing?
Oh my goodness. That feels like I should ask that person the question. How do you see New York shape my writing, which I know you clearly do. Here's what I think. I think when people find out that I was a kid here, that's the thing that surprises people most. Oh my goodness, what does it mean to be a child in Manhattan? And I have a poem in the book which says yes, that's weird, but I didn't know it was weird because you don't know anything other than the thing you are. However, a thing that I now know is a consequence of being a child that grows up in the city. Is like when you're a kid, hopefully you have parents who are trying to teach you that there are lots of different kinds of people in the world who are all worthy of love and respect. They look different from you. They worship different gods. They speak different languages. They have different life experiences, and they are doing this path of being human in a way that looks nothing like yours. And you can teach a kid that in theory. And sometimes they walk out of the house and everyone around them looks like them, speaks the same language, prays to the same God. And so it really is theoretical.
Yep.
And in New York City, it is not theoretical. Like the moment you step out of your door, you are confronted with people who are doing human differently from you. And I think that's so helpful to know from the youngest age that like the way I'm doing it is one of many ways. Right. And isn't that fascinating? And isn't that helpful to know that like there's no wrong way actually. There's your way and their way and his way and her way and all of these other ways. And I think maybe having that as like one of the earliest like understandings in me helped create a curiosity that is what is the through line of the poems, right? Like if everyone's doing it differently and everyone has a different way of humaning, like how curious. Let me look at that. I think that is how New York City like got in there early.
And we have so many different ways to model ourselves on all of those kinds of, like just being in the world, right? But also that shared space. Like we share space in the city in the ways that other people don't in other cities. Like
for sure.
And it's really interesting. You can sort of tell who the new transplants are because they're freaked out. They're just freaked out all the time. And I say this as someone who lived here part-time as a tiny person and then came back. But I needed an almost decade-long break to come back. And I hit some other cities and I was like, oh yeah, I need to go home.
Yeah. And also I think, you know, that's like the romantic way of like, oh, how does New York inform? Oh, it teaches me that we're all different and strange and I'm curious. And then there's also like more practical things, which are like show up in the poems too, which is like, I didn't know what a raccoon was until I was, you know, I was such a city kid for my childhood that like there's certain things I just don't, I have like different reference points on, you know?
Okay. But also tiny kitchens, right? The fact that you can find inspiration in a tiny kitchen. We've all done that where it's like, I'm sorry, you can't even be in the kitchen with me right now. I love you to death. And yes, I am cooking a meal for you, but there's actually physically no room for you here. Please go stand in the tiny hallway. Is that even a hallway? I mean, we just learn to move in the world in a different way. Favorite thing about living in New York?
Oh my heavens.
Hey, listen, I am just the vessel.
I like that I'm like somehow morphing into like New York City Tourism Bureau ambassador. I'm not mad about it. Favorite thing about living in New York? I mean, this is also in the book, which is embarrassing, but honestly, like I'm so lucky that so many people choose this city to live in. Yeah. And that's not, you know, that could be true of lots of cities, but the fact that everyone that I love is willing to either live here or visit here because it's a pretty cool place means that I get to like be around my people, which is, you know, that's not about New York, I guess. That's about the humans that make it up, but that's the real answer. This is also in there, but like I love New York City, what I call New York City holidays. And they're like holidays that you celebrate that don't make sense to anybody else, you know? So like barista remembers you by name day and baby waves at you on the subway day and hawk spotted in the park day. And we recently just finished Pink Week, which is really one of my favorite New York City holidays. That one's a big time for me personally.
Okay.
But that is also maybe responsible for why your allergies are acting up.
Oh, I mean, it's beautiful, but I would like my voice back, please. I don't think I'm asking for too much. And then I was in LA and everything, all of the jacarandas, it was beautiful too. And I'm like, oh, all of the plants are trying to murder me. This is why I am a city person most of the year. I do want people to have time with you to sign books, but there was one of you asked, what do you suggest for newcomers? I say hang out in bookstores, hang out in places where people read, hang out in places like that, because that's where you find your tribe. And it also leads me to the other poem that I would really like Sarah to take us out on.
Oh, sure.
Because it is gorgeous and it fits the mood, and it's a really nice way to end this very fun taping, which I could keep going, but we do also need to get some books signed.
Thank you for reading these poems and having
They're so good.
Things to say and ask. And thanks everybody for being here. There's a literary trope that I love, which is direct address to reader. Like, dear reader, I married him, etc. That's theoretical, not a reveal of anything. And I was thinking about getting a chance to make a book and the object of the book, and that it would exist at some point in someone's hands. And I was thinking about that person who was reading it. And so I wrote this in that spirit, and it's called Reader Dear. Maybe where you are, it is nighttime, or maybe it is day. Maybe someone is reading this to you, the way any dear one of mine would warn you that going into a bookstore with me entails being read to, like the poetry section is the dressing room I've parked myself outside of, where I keep making you try on poems until we find one that's a good fit. Or maybe you're reading to yourself unaccompanied, maybe out loud, or maybe in silence, maybe in a special accent you have for poetry that nobody else can hear. Maybe you haven't committed yet. Maybe you are skimming through pages and trying to decide whether you can justify another book, especially one without a twist ending. Maybe you are looking for a gift for someone, and you heard somewhere a book of poems is a good offering. One time, someone broke into my rental car and opened a box of my books and took the books out, but left them all behind. And sometimes I imagine they stopped mid-burglary and flipped through a couple poems before deciding, not for me. So maybe that's what's going on right now. Maybe you have broken into my rental car and are standing there thinking, not again. Maybe you're heartbroken and you're looking for someone else to find language for what doesn't feel languageable. Baby, I've been there. Maybe you've borrowed this. Maybe somebody lent it to you. Maybe the library or a friend. Maybe you stole it. Maybe on purpose, or maybe the way I borrowed Jeff McDaniel's poetry book from the Urban Word Library once when I was 14 and just forgot and never gave it back, because sometimes that is also how burglary works. So slow and ordinary and unnoticed by even you who are doing the stealing, and then boom, years have gone by and you're holding something that isn't yours, and somewhere there's a hole that you caused in the fabric of everything. Maybe you're sorry. Maybe you're guilty. Maybe you're as disenchanted as I am by the kingdom of ownership and are ready to disavow it entirely, to embark somewhere the entire premise is absurd. The only rule my parents had when I was growing up was we share in this family, which they used to scold me if I was withholding something my brother wanted. But somewhere along the way, it morphed into a guideline. If I have something, then I have something to share. And that's it, I guess. Half my sandwich, and also my couch, also my afternoon, also what happened, what I've learned, what makes me laugh, what made me think of you, what I think the poem means, the metaphors I'm using to explain things to myself, what I can't figure out, what I don't want people to know about me, and what I don't want to know about me. And it isn't a superpower. It isn't a curse. It isn't a legacy. It isn't a trap. It is what it is, and it is what I've got, and you can't steal it, because right about now, is when it becomes yours too.
Oh, Sarah Kay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, audience, too. Please also join me in thanking Sarah again.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.